Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tyler Ashbaugh. I've been a web developer for the past 16 plus years, the last 7 of which I've been involved with the Drupal community. And then for the last 5 years or so, I've been involved with simplesamlphp, which is probably why most of you are here today, is to learn about that. So I thank you all for coming ahead of time here. There's nothing like, putting together a nice technical demo and then have it all fall apart on you right before the start of the presentation. So that's what I just got done recovering from. So if I seem a little scattered, that's why. But I think everything's working now, so we'll get started with that. So today we're going to cover a few things, mainly like the basic components that are required if you're going to do a project with simplesaml, PHP, and Drupal together. So the basic components that are required, we're going to go over like how to configure things. Mainly this talk is geared towards developers and getting set up locally to get started, because 5 years ago when I did my first project that required simplesaml, it wasn't clear to me how to get set up locally so I could test like assertions from an IDP and things like that. So hopefully this talk today will kind of help you get started on that. Then, we'll move into configuring like the service provider required, and Drupal will go over like how to trace SAML messages back and forth so you can troubleshoot more efficiently. And then we'll talk about some things that have to do with deploying a service provider, and then also like how you can get involved with the community, the simplesaml community. Now we'll move on to kind of a story. So I find that it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around the components required when you first come to this. So if you've not done a project like this before, you kind of, I like to put things in more common terminology, scenarios that make sense to an average person, right? So I like to think about this as having 3 components. There's the identity provider, the service provider, and then the Drupal site. So we're gonna tell a little story here. So we're gonna pretend like someone's ready to, throw a party in Atlanta, and this person wants to throw this party, but they want to control who gets into the party. So they're gonna hire a bouncer to work the door. And we'll just say the bouncer's name is Shrek. So you got this big old ogre who's gonna watch the door for you. Anybody that tries to come into the party, he's gonna stop them and say, "Hey, I need to see your ID, and I need to verify some things before you go in." So let's just say, for instance, this party is only open to people from the state of Georgia. Okay, so when they come to Shrek, the party goer has to say, "Oh, here's my ID," and it's going to be a state-issued ID from Georgia. So before the party starts, Shrek is going to go to whatever agency it is in Georgia that handles IDs. Like in Texas, where I'm from, it's the Department of Public Safety. So Shrek goes down there and says, "Hey, I'm going to be working this party. I want to make sure that I understand what a valid ID from your state looks like so that I can spot fakes, so that I can know, what to look for, watermarks and that sort of thing." And so Shrek's going to get all knowledgeable about that. And then on the day of the party, Shrek's going to be there, and he's going to be the man, and he's going to stop people from getting in that aren't from Georgia or that don't have a valid ID. Oh, and then by the way, so we're going to be looking at IDs. We're going to be looking at the person's age to say, okay, we don't want anyone under the age of 18 coming into this party. So Shrek turned those people away. And then if they are over age 21, we want them to come in through a certain door, so we can put a wristband around their wrist so they can go drink a few beers or whatever. And if they're under 21 but over 18 and over, then we're going to mark them with a black X through another door so that we make sure they don't get any alcohol. So Shrek knows how to do all that. He's all set up, and then he's going to work the guest list as people come through and send them into the party appropriately. So how this breaks out in a Saml scenario is you've got the state of Georgia, which is responsible for producing valid identification, letting people know how they can tell if the ID is valid or not. So they're going to be our identity provider in this scenario. And then you've got the bouncer, you've got Shrek. He is going to be like the middleman in between the identity provider and the Drupal site. So Shrek is going to be the service provider in this scenario. And then, of course, you've got the party, which is the Drupal site, because all great parties start in Drupal. So that's kind of like a lowdown of the major players in this, the components. So now we can kind of continue on here to the next screen. So we talked about like the two components that handle the IDs and that sort of thing. It's like a handshake in between Shrek the bouncer and the state of Georgia. So we know we've got good people coming in. Then on top of that, you need a piece to kind of integrate with Drupal, and that's where the simplesamlphp Auth module comes in handy. So we'll talk about that. So let's talk about identity providers for a little bit. Let me see here. Just take that down. And so to get started, I used to, once upon a time, set up like an identity provider using simplesamlphp, because you can do that. You can set it up with like static username and password. You can put in all the attributes that you want, and you can get started. Oh yeah, I can go full screen. Yeah. Is that better, Matt? So anyway, so like you could do all these things statically. Personally, I find setting up simplesamlphp as an IDP kind of an onerous task. So, and oftentimes I run into issues where like it just won't work for me. So I've kind of abandoned that as an IDP or whatever. Oh, it's small. Let's see here. Better, not better. Let me turn off my camera for a minute. Let me see if does that help? Is it bigger now? Nope. Very nice now. How about you, Matt? Is it still better? Okay, great. Okay, so that's it. Okay, great. All right, so I've started using Auth0 as my IDP because it's free. It's pretty simple and straightforward to set up. So you can just go and create an account with Auth0. You can even single sign in with your Google account, so you don't have to leverage yet another account. Let's see here, applications. Okay, you see Auth0. Okay, great. So when you get into Auth0, you're just going to go into applications. Let me increase this some too. You go into applications. You're going to create an application. And it's real simple. You just give it a name. DigitalCamp Atlanta. And then you can choose what type of application it's going to be. Usually, for this scenario, it's just going to be a regular web application. You click create, and then it asks, what technology are you using for your project? We're using PHP in this scenario. And then it's set up at that point. There's one more step here to really get things going, and that's in the add-ons tab here, where they have a SAML 2 web app. And this is what we're most interested in because this is going to handle the communication with simplesamlphp. So we're going to turn that on. Then it asks basically for an application callback URL. So this is going to be the URL for your service provider, not your Drupal site, but your service provider. So you'll put that in there. I'll show one I already have configured here in just a minute so you can see that URL. Then there's some settings here. So you can do some mappings of data that you want to be asserted over, but you don't obviously have to do that, but that's where it's at. Let me just open the one I prepared already for this. So settings, add-ons, here we go. Okay, so, and this is great because, I'm running Drupal and simplesaml locally in a Lando container. So even though this URL is not accessible through the web, it works just fine for me. It wouldn't obviously work for somebody else. It's not on my machine, but that's it. But basically, I've got my Drupal site URL, and then in a subdirectory, we're running simplesaml as a service provider. And then the pieces that we're interested in are going to be under the usage tab here. So it's going to give you the issuer name. This is going to be important later because it's going to identify what auth source we're going to reference in the service provider. Then we've got the login URL. So if you want to send someone directly to log in to your SSO IDP, you can. And then you've got the metadata download. So this is also going to be important. We're going to download this and get some XML and use that in a little bit. So that is primarily what I do now for setting up an IDP. So it's real quick, it's real simple, and it's going to work great for us so we can kind of get up and going here. Then let's take a look at what we do for the service provider. And I can't really talk about that until we talk about setting up Drupal. Let's see here. Let me see if I can make this editor bigger. Is VS Code like giant for you guys, tiny, or does it look okay now? Anybody? Is this looking okay for you? Can you read this? It's good. Okay, great. Okay, so basically I just took the basic recipe from Lando for Drupal 8 and installed that, or initialized that, and then installed it. And then the next thing I did was just like open up the web browser and go through the installation process through the GUI, and it set up a site, and I chose to do like whatever that demo site that they have on there, so it has content and that sort of thing. So that's literally all I did to set up Drupal. I didn't add anything else besides that. And then once that's up and running and looks good, then the next thing that I did was just did a composer require for the simplesamlphp auth module. And after composer installed that and I did a PM enable on it, the great thing is that it adds to the vendor directory simplesamlphp. So you no longer have to like go out to simplesamlphp and download the source and then create the directory and all this stuff. Like it just does that out of the box. And then basically after that, then we set up a symlink to the web root of simplesamlphp. So this www root here is now symlinked into /simplesaml. And so I actually did that from inside the container. So I did a lando SSH and then did the symlink inside there. Then the next thing that I did was went into the Auth module, and they actually have a pretty decent README here that helps. Talks about prerequisites, which I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to this because I just let Composer kind of handle all of that. Then the piece to really look for in here is going to be the configuration. So with us having another application in this subdirectory, like the way Drupal is configured out of the box is it's going to deny access to that subdirectory. So we need a rewrite rule or a rewrite condition in our htaccess to allow the simplesaml in. So let's see, where did that go? htaccess. So yeah, so basically you just add this line in right after the statistics line and right before the line that denies access to all the other applications or all other PHP applications that Drupal isn't expecting. So then once that's up, then access should be cleared to the service provider, and then we move on to configuring the service provider to work with both the identity provider as well as the Drupal site. So let's go talk to Shrek as it is today. So let's see here. All of the things that you're going to need to change here are going to be buried down in the root directory of simplesaml. So there's a few things to look at here. When you first get simplesamlphp, like this config directory is going to be empty, and then the metadata folder is also going to be empty. The things you need for these folders are going to be found in config-templates and then metadata-templates. So for all intents and purposes of a service provider, the main ones you're going to need is config.php, authsources.php, and then you're going to need to have a metadata file to describe your IDP. So SAML 20, because we're using SAML 2.0, the IDP is hosted remotely, not locally. So those are the three, and we'll walk through the changes that we need to make there in just a minute. The other thing that's important here is signing SAML assertions back and forth. So you're going to need a certificate to do that, a private certificate, and then you're also going to need the certificate from the identity provider so you can validate. So that's how Shrek knows if it's a fake or not, and you can download that right here on the Auth0 usage tab. So download Auth0 certificate, and it's just a simple .pem file, and you drop it into the Cert directory here. The Cert directory isn't there by default, so you'll need to create that and then just drop your certificate there. in. Then let's see here. I have a README with a lot of these steps spelled out that help you configure all this, but it needs to be cleaned up. So after the conference, I'll clean this up and publish this repository so you guys can download it and spin it up yourselves. But let's see here. So here's the syntax for creating the cert for your service provider, and you just run that and then ensure those two files that it spits out are in the cert directory. So I usually just navigate into the cert directory and execute it. Once you have that, then you're ready to configure the service provider further. Let's see. So we'll go to the config. So this config is pretty much the same as the one from the templates. We've just changed just a few things in here. So we've left this as simplesaml for the subdirectory that the application's in, so it knows to make everything relative to that path. All of these were all as they are out of the box. You can come in here, you can set the technical contact name and email if you want. Doesn't really matter, but it will kind of complain at you if you don't have something in there besides the default. And then you can put in like a random secret salt. The password, once we launch the service provider, you'll be able to sign in and use a few utilities from simplesamlphp that are really helpful. So this is the password you'll use for that. You don't need a username. It hard codes the username. Then you can protect the index page so that other people can't get in and kind of mess around with your service provider. So I just put that to true. I set protect metadata to false, and that's because some IDPs, and Auth0 is one of these, they will query your metadata on a regular occurrence to make sure they have the latest information about the service provider. And if you set this to true, then it kind of breaks that functionality for them. So I just suggest you keep that as false. It's false by default. Then the other piece in here that is important is the store. Where did it go? Okay, so the store type. So this is how simplesaml stores like session information about people that are SSOing in. By default, it is PHP session. However, Drupal also uses PHP session, so you get like conflicts here. So just to make it easy, I just use the SQL database to store that information. We're just using MySQL here. And then it takes care of creating all the tables and things that you need there. You just put in your credentials that you need for it. It will prefix the tables in the database with simplesamlphp or whatever you put here. So that makes it real easy to kind of see which tables belong to it. And then that's it for the config. I know I'm kind of going a little fast here. Do we have any questions so far? No. Okay, great. So then the next piece of this is the auth source. So we want to have two auth sources here. One is the admin auth source, and this is the piece that kind of lets you into the tooling of SimpleSaml. So it tells it like where to authenticate the password for that. And then the second one is the actual service provider that will be used for identity providers to communicate with. So I left SAML:SP, that's the default. Then the next is you got to tell it about your private key and certificate. Back in the config file, it defined the cert directory where it is. So you don't have to like prepend this with some path or whatever, just give it the name and it'll know where to find it. Then the last piece is what identity provider should it use by default. If you omit this, then like if you have multiple ones configured, so like let's say we were going to let people from Georgia into the party as well as people from Texas, so then we would need an identity provider for both Georgia and Texas. So if you had multiple ones, you could either specify the default or you could leave it off, and there would be like a drop down that guests could go and select which identity provider they're going to authenticate with. So this is that string that I was telling you to be sure to make note of in Auth0 right here. So this one right here. So you'll put that in there, and that tells it how to identify the identity provider in the metadata, which we're going to show here in just a minute. That's it as far as the auth sources go. It's real simple, straightforward, not a whole lot of stuff in here. And then on to the metadata. Now, you need to make sure that in this array that this key matches not only the one from Auth0 here, but also that it matches the one in the auth sources. If not, it'll get confused and SimpleSaml will complain at you. But anyway, so make sure that's there. When you first get started, you maybe don't have all of this metadata available to you from the identity provider. So you can start out with a much simpler one, similar to this. So let me just paste that in there. So something similar to this. So you would just have that URN in there. You would have the URL for the sign-on service and the URL for the logout service and the certificate name that it uses to validate the assertion. So this is what I started with to kind of get things set up. But once you have the service provider up, then we can do something a little more handy. So let's try to bring this up here. So let's see. Wrong. Oh. Okay, so when you see this screen, that's when you can get up and you can do the happy dance because your service provider is up and running, and for the most part, everything is configured correctly. So whenever I see this screen, like I'm super happy, everything's gone according to plan, and we're ready to move on. But what I wanted to show you real quick was once you have this up and you sign in, there's this Federation tab here, and you can click on it, and then it has this tool called XML to simplesamlphp metadata converter. So once I get this set up and I get in here, then this is like the very next place I go, and we can choose the metadata file that we downloaded from Auth0 and tell it to parse it. And then it spits out exactly, let me make this bigger. So it spits out exactly what you need to put in that Saml 20 IDP remote. Here they even give you the name. They try to make it as simple as possible. And they even give you like a copy button here. So once I got all this set up, parsed the file, then I just went in here, copied it, and then overwrote the original metadata entry I had here. Just overwrote it. It's sad that they still use the old array syntax, but that's just how it is. You can update that if you want to. So once this is in, at this point, you're ready to test out the login. So before I even go back in and start messing with the Auth Module settings and getting that set up, I go in and just make sure that I can do the handshake between the identity provider and the service provider. So to do that, when you sign in here to the front page, you can go to the Authentication tab, and then you click on Test Configured Authentication Sources, and you'll see two here. One's admin, one's default SP. So admin is the auth source that we use to sign in here. So obviously it's working. We don't need to test it. Then the next one is the default SP. So when you click on this, it's going to redirect you to the identity provider so you can authenticate, and then it'll return you. So I already had a session here. Let me see. Let me clear out this cookie real quick. Sources, cookies. Where are you, cookies? Where is it? Here we go, cookies. Okay, so you can see there's just a cookie in here that handles the session, and it holds all this stuff. So we can just kind of clear that, blow that away, and then we're going to go back in and try this again. Okay, so now you can see it's redirected me to Auth0, and I can sign in with Google, right? So then it brings you to this nice page that shows you all the attributes that were just asserted over. So this gives you information about name, given name, surname, all this stuff. Now, in addition to these, you can also assert other attributes through Auth0 through this, where was it? Oh yeah, over here. So in the settings here, you can do other mappings to change the name or whatever you want, or add additional ones. You can even like assert static attributes over to kind of help you. So like if you already know the contract from the IDP for the project you're working on, then you can go in there and just spell all this out so that when you're doing development, you can make sure everything is coming through as you would expect it, and everything just kind of flows like it will in production. So we've got this, all these pieces are here, everything's great. So now we know, like we have a working service provider, we have a working identity provider, they talk to each other. So Shrek finally knows how to tell a fake from a real ID and knows who to let in and who not to let in. So at this point, you're ready to move on to Drupal and set it up so that you can actually use this technology. So let's just hop back over here. Let's see, open editors. This one, not this one. I want modules, contrib, readme, open preview. Okay. so there's one thing that you need to set in the settings.php file for simplesaml, and that's just the directory on where to find on where to find it, on where to find the installation. Now, the challenging thing with this, and this is something that I forget when I haven't worked with it in a while, simplesaml has to be co-located on the same server as your Drupal site. So you can't like abstract it out into another server or whatever. It's got to be there locally, so you can put the path in here to it. In this scenario, we're leveraging the one that's in the vendor directory. So in my settings.php file, I've got vendor, simplesamlphp, simplesamlphp, and that's going to tell the auth module all it needs to know about where to be. So then, sorry, I know we're starting to run short on time, so I'm trying to get to the end here. And let me see this. Okay, so this is the actual auth settings page in Drupal. It's located under configuration. Configuration. Come on, log me in. So under configuration and people, you got simplesamlphp auth settings here, and that's what brings us to this page. And there's a few tabs here, so we'll run through these quickly. By default, the activate checkbox is going to be unchecked, and that's to save you from a white screen of death. So if you don't have everything configured just properly and you have this checked, you will take your whole site down, and you will have like very little to go on to understand why it is that way. So pro tip, if that should ever happen to you, go into the database from the back door and disable the simplesamlphp module or auth module, and your site will come back up. But that's really the only way you can do it. So don't check this button until you're sure everything's right. So we have the name for the service provider we're using, which is default-sp. You can change that if you want to, but it's a pain all the places you got to update it. The next is the link name for the federated login. So when we go to the login page to sign in, under username and password, you're going to see a link there. It's going to say federated login. When you click on that, then it will allow you to SSO in. So they've been nice. In Drupal 7, this configuration wasn't there. You'd have to change it some other way, but they've made it nice as a config here, so you can change it whatever you want to say. You can even not display that link and just give a URL to your users to SSO in, but I would not encourage you to do that. Then early on, when you're trying to make sure that things are going well, you can turn on debugging for some improved logging. We always want to, almost always want to register users when they SSO in. So if they don't already exist, it'll create them. Then I don't usually ever mess with the security one. Then you move on to local authentication. So this is where you need to make some decisions about how users are going to be made. So you can just say, can they sign in with a local account, or do they have to SSO in? And then you can choose like what roles can still have a local account, what roles cannot. You can even do it at the user ID level to let someone log in with a local account. And then you can give them a URL to redirect to after logging out if that's something you want to do. And then finally, and probably most importantly, is the user info and syncing. So this is where you map the attribute being asserted over to the actual a user entity in Drupal. So you remember this page when we saw all these things here? this is what you're looking for. There are some times when you can just use the name, but most often you have to use the fully qualified attribute name here, which I've done here. So I just made it easy, just uniquely identify the user by email address, use that as their username, and use that as the email address, obviously. Okay, and you can synchronize email address on every login, so if it changes, which we know they sometimes do, it'll just sync it up. Then you can do some automatic role population here. So this is kind of what I was getting at with the story. So we may want to map people 21 and over to the role that contains the wristband, and then those that are 18 to 20 get mapped to the role with the black X on their hand. And then you can tell it to reevaluate the roles every time they log in so that stuff all stays nicely in sync. Let's see, we've only got like 2 minutes left here. So I just wanted to, I'll just take a break here and just see if you guys have any questions. I'm going to put all this, I'm going to put this project in a GitHub repo and share it out with the attendees. So you guys can pull this down, hopefully, and just do a Lando start and be on your way with a kind of a working instance here. But just wanted to take a quick check of the room to see if anybody had any questions. All right, so a couple of things that we didn't get a chance to get to today. One is like, what happens if something goes wrong? How can you see what's going on in between the service provider and the identity provider in Drupal? And there's this great extension called Saml-tracer, and it opens up this little console thing for you. It'll show you all of the communication going back and forth. So we see we've got all these gets and posts, and you can go in and log in here, and we'll see some more. You can get down to the post here and see the parameters. It decrypts the SAML for you, so you can see all the attributes being asserted. So anyways, this is an invaluable tool if you're having trouble. So there's that. Then also we didn't cover how to map attributes to a user record in a hook in Drupal. And then also we didn't finish with talking about how to deploy and how to get involved. So sorry for that, guys, but I'll be following up with a GitHub with a pretty lengthy README in it to kind of help you out. All right, thanks a lot for your time, guys. I appreciate it, and have a great camp.